So good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here tonight at the Canadian Institute in Greece. Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir et bienvenue à l'Institut canadien en Grèce. Merci les amis de l'Institut, c'est toujours un plaisir de vous voir. Σας καλωσορίζουμε απόψε στην μια έτσι ιδιαίτερη βραδιά στο Καναδικό Ινστιτούτο στην Ελλάδα. My name is Delibassis, and I'm responsible for the cultural program at the Canadian Institute. It's a great pleasure for me and for everyone at the Institute to have with us tonight a very special guest, Canadian writer Irena Karafilly, for a discussion of her work, her inspirations, her connection to Greece, in relation to her novel Arrested Song, and perhaps a little bit more, but I won't tell anymore. Tonight's moderator was to be Diane Sugart, well known to most of you, journalist and writer herself. Unfortunately, she's sick. I am replacing her as the moderator, and I hope that I can do as good a job, so please don't be too strict. Let me tell you a few words about Irena Karafilly, a very interesting person. She was born in Russia and educated in Canada, where she obtained a Master of Arts in English from McGill University, Montreal, and then went on the other side of the country and and received a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of British Columbia. She is the author of several acclaimed books and of numerous short stories, poems, articles, which have been published in both literary and mainstream magazines, as well as in various North American newspapers, including the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune. Her work has won several literary prizes, including the National Magazine Award and the CBC Literary Award. This year, the novel we will discuss, Arrested Song, was a finalist for the Quebec Writers Federation Fiction Prize, a very important award. She currently divides her time between Canada and Greece, and specifically Montreal and Athens. I will not continue. I want to welcome you, Irena. It's wonderful to have you here. And let's all of us welcome her to the Institute.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you all for venturing out on this chilly evening.
Irena, you gave birth to this wonderful novel. I'd like you to tell us about it. Tell us a little bit about this wonderful book.
So Arrested Song deals with the life and times of an extraordinary village woman who lived through some of the most tumultuous decades of modern Greek history. The novel is set on the island of Lesbos, and one kind reader told me that next to visiting the island is reading my long but very evocative book. The story deals with, it deals with Greek history, but at the heart of it is the relationship between my protagonist, Calliope Adam, and the German officer in charge of her village. Calliope is a member of the Greek resistance. So whether you're interested in Greek history or in doomed relationships, you'll probably find something of interest in this novel.
But it's interesting that you chose Greece. I mean, obviously the history is important, but what is your own connection to Greece?
So back in the 70s, I arrived on the island of Lesbos, planning to stay for a week or two, and I ended up spending the better part of a decade on Lesbos. I had by then visited two other islands when I landed in a fishing village whose official name is Mithimna, but it's widely referred to by its ancient name, which is Molivos. It was the first time I found myself falling in love with a place. I began to write about the village soon after and haven't stopped even years after having left it. So, what's to explain it? Is it pure nostalgia for sun and sea? No. A Greek village, probably any village, is a microcosm, and as such provides a goldmine, really, for any fiction writer. I learned so much about human nature through my life in Molivos, and I love writing about it, especially when I'm away from it, especially when there is a snowstorm raging outside my windows. And much of the novel was in fact written while I was in Canada, away from it and trying to evoke everything that I had experienced. I wonder whether you'd like to see some photos of the place, would you? So you see why I fell in love with it. Okay. Just have to find them. Give me a minute, please. So I'm showing you this one because as you know, it's not working yet?
Double click.
Oh, I can double click on this?
There you go.
Okay.
Use the arrows.
Which arrows? These arrows? To move on to the next one? Okay, I'm showing you this one first because, as you all know, Greece has over 250 days of sunshine a year, is what they say. But I wanted you to see that Molivos is beautiful even when it rains. It is, isn't it? So I arrived on a sunny day, and it was even more beautiful. My daughter tells me to use the arrows. It's not working.
There you go.
That's not what I want.
The other way.
The other way.
The other way. I don't get prizes for my technological skills. No, he told me
Not
to do
yet.
this. He told me to do this.
There.
Okay,
No. Do what were you just doing?
I want to go to the other photos. There.
Look.
Both of them at the
It's
same
not
time?
working. Just click.
Well, I have to go back then.
Yeah, you'll have to go back.
Sorry.
Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Just click on the next one when you're ready.
So here's a distant view of Molivos on a sunnier day.
Make it bigger.
Make it bigger.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, I have to keep doing this. So this is the fishing harbor. And if you've read the novel, how many of you have read the novel?
Oh,
Okay.
excellent.
All right. Well, if you've read novel, then you know that this is where Calliope has her first encounter with Lawrence Umbright, the German officer. It's when they first get to know each other, even though they've been working together for a while. The reason they're working together is that Calliope is the daughter of the headmaster and has knowledge of some foreign languages. And so she's hired as their interpreter. Yes, and they have their first meaningful conversation in this fishing harbor. This is, of course, photographed today, well, in recent years anyway, and it may not have looked like that during the occupation because one of the impositions of the Germans was that fishing be stopped almost entirely. So I'm sure the harbor did not look like this. This is a view of the village from the harbor. As you can see, it's very picturesque. Sorry, I know what I have to do. I know I have to do, but it's. This is the Genoese 14th century castle, which crowns the village. Again, there are some key scenes that take place there. There's also an interesting story, possibly apocryphal, I don't know, but the story goes that in the 15th century, when the Turks were approaching, planning to invade the village, the prince, the ruling prince, the Genoese prince, was away at the time, and the village despaired until the wife, the prince's wife, appeared in full armor, crying, "Let's show the Turks what we're made of," and save the day. Of course, eventually the Turks did invade, but on that particular occasion, Calliope had, years later, Calliope had an interesting feminist story to tell.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that she was a schoolmistress.
Yeah.
I was coming to that, but okay, once again. And so this is a view from the castle. This was taken from the spot where I landed for the first time. I got off the bus from the capital, which is Mytilene, and this is what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning of my love affair with the village.
It's still small. Okay.
This is one of the streets in the Agora. The canopy is wisteria, and this was taken around Easter time. It's usually, this was taken, I guess, during a siesta because the street is empty. It's not usually empty. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong?
Yep. It's all the ones you opened. It's all the ones, yeah.
Okay. This is why my daughter is here. This is another photo of the Agora. The Agora is the marketplace, for those of you who don't know. And so the streets are all cobblestoned, and the village is stepped all the way to the hilltop castle, and would explain why years ago I was much more fit than I am today. Because anywhere you went, you had to climb up and down those steps. Escape.
Here.
Ah, okay. I didn't escape. I have to go back.
to the
Yeah, I
original.
don't know how you do, I don't know what you're doing.
Okay, then I have to go back. Please, I know what to do, just have to, it'll take a minute. Okay. Okay, and so if you want to see more, of course, this is the way it looks today, the cushions. Sorry. But there are, all the cushions belong to a bar, which is on the side. But the stairs look pretty much the way they did in Calliope's time, which was around the Second World War and in subsequent decades. And there are scenes in which he's running up and down those steps. I just wanted you to have an idea of what it looked like. Do you want to do this? Thank you. As the Turks were in charge of the island for over 400 years, there are still reminders of their presence. This is one of the Turkish public fountains. There are several scenes that take place at these fountains before plumbing was installed. Okay, so this is easy. I believe that this photo was actually taken at a Mytilene Cafenion, but it looks pretty much the way Cafenions did in Molivos as well. And I think that there are some bucolic scenes which I'll skip since we're likely to run out of time because of the technological difficulties. But this was taken a few years ago on the very spot where I first landed. When I first landed, I was able to climb onto the wall and sit looking at the see. This was no longer possible when this picture was taken, but the spot looks pretty much the same as it was on the day I fell in love with the place. Okay, so these are the pictures, and now Zoe probably has a question.
Well, actually, I mean, Lesbos, Molivos is a beautiful place. A lot of history, and I'm sure.
I know what she's doing. It's
Yeah.
okay.
No, I know it was the original. Who could put the original picture up? But anyway, it's a beautiful place. It's a historic place, and clearly the island itself, the town itself, inspired you, and you brought it back with you when you went to Canada, because you said most of your book was written in Montreal. But what was left, what you brought back with you was very much connected to the story you created, right? So what inspired you to write that story? How did what you saw and then the character and the story that started developing in your mind, how did that come to be? What inspired
Well, actually,
that
it was
design?
it was not anything I saw to begin with. It was
It
what
was
I
the other way
read. It was
around.
what I read. It was what I read, and what I read was, incredible as it sounds, a Canadian poem by Irving Layton. Was a distinguished Canadian poet, who had written a poem titled Stella, about a woman, village woman, who had immolated herself the year before I arrived. He had given me a collection of his Greek poems, and there was this poem telling the story of her life. She had been a schoolmistress and until the Civil War, and had an affair when she was young and beautiful with a man who eventually became nominated for the Nobel Prize, Stratis Mirivelis. The Greeks among you no doubt know who he was. He became a very famous Greek writer. When he met Calliope, he was still a young, unknown, aspiring writer, and she was a recent widow. They had an affair, and when the affair was over, he left the village and wrote The Schoolmistress with the Golden Eyes. The novel became, as you probably know, a Greek classic, and eventually was translated into many languages, and tourists began to arrive asking to see the beautiful schoolmistress with the golden eyes. They were still doing it in the 1970s when Calliope was an old woman, and soon after became demented, and overheard a rumor that they were planning to move her to an old folks' home. And so she died as dramatically as she had lived. She immolated herself. So I arrived a year after this happened, and having read the poem, I became interested and began to ask questions. And I found out more about her, and the more I found out, the more inclined I was to write about her. I wrote a short story, and several years later, when I felt confident enough, I began to write what became a historical Greek novel that took 7 years out of my life to research and write.
So your interest, I mean, obviously that story inspired you in the character, but the whole book, what did you want to accomplish with that by writing this book?
Well, I set out to present the portrait of an Aegean village in times of peace and war through the life of an extraordinary woman. But of course, throughout is the story of Greece itself and its tumultuous modern history.
Indeed. And as you say, it was a very tumultuous modern history. First half of the book is set during the German occupation, a very difficult time, hunger, famine, disease, illness, because of there was no way to get well, poverty, tragedy in families, death. I could go on and on.
Well, arrests, torture.
Arrest, torture,
Sure.
indeed,
Executions.
indeed. A very tragic time, and a time when it was very, it would normally be difficult for a woman to be able to stand her ground on certain things. And yet Calliope is, you know, she may not appear as strong in the beginning, but undoubtedly she has a very strong personality, and I don't know if you would like to dwell a little bit on that, or you'd like to
Calliope, of course, finds herself in an incredibly difficult position because, on the one hand, she is an active resistance member, and on the other, she finds herself starting to have feelings for the officer in charge. So imagine her having to, for example, carry ammunition to the partisans. Any one of those bullets could have killed the man she's falling in love with. I love stories with moral dilemmas, don't you? And so this is at the heart of the novel.
Sure. Do you want to read us a section or a part from the first part of the book?
Sure.
I think it would be very interesting to...
Just please give me a minute, because how do I stop that? I'm going to... Oh no, I can read this, actually. I can read this from my book.
Of course.
The second one
Even
I can't.
better. Even better.
I can say. It's been published. So, Molivos' sister village, which is just down the road, is called Petra, and this particular chapter takes place there because it is governed by a particularly sadistic German officer. And so this is what happens. Petra's schoolmaster was a heavy-set man who had spent his life avoiding physical exertion. He had turned 38 that spring, but there was something comical about him, the ruddy complexion perhaps, or the bulbous nose. Achilles Macris was nonetheless esteemed for his wide-ranging knowledge, as well as his evident affection for his charges. If he chanced to see a mother berate her child, or a father box his son's ear, the schoolmaster was sure to intervene with all the authority vested in his position. Moliviatis, who had married into Petra families, said he reminded them of Philippas Adam, that's Calliope's father. God sanctify his soul. The Petra relatives grumbled, but took Macris's meddling in their stride. A childless man could not be expected to understand anything about raising children, much less keep his nose out of people's business. But Macris had his own worries. Soon after Lieutenant Franz Dwinger had been posted to Petra, his wife Alcestis had started sleepwalking. The night before the events leading to her husband's death, she had left the house around midnight and went strolling along the beach. There were those who thought there was something suspicious about these nocturnal walks. It was a well-known fact that Achilles Macris, 14 years older than Alcestis, was even more besotted with his lovely wife than with the schoolchildren. It was equally well known that no good would ever come from immoderate love for one's spouse, especially one who had been talked into marrying against inclination. Macris found his wife sometime after midnight. He ushered her home and put her to bed, singing her to sleep as one would a child. But he himself could not sleep and spent half the night reading Babylonian myths. In the morning he went to school, doing his best to impart knowledge to his young charges. School attendance had improved in the past year, thanks to the relief program organized by the Red Cross. With flour flown in and soup kitchens set up, island children were no longer in danger of starving. Some even seemed hardy enough for occasional mischief. The schoolmaster permitted himself only one indulgence, one glass of ouzo on his way home. The day after he had found his wife on the beach, Macris locked the school door, waved to the children playing in the yard, then headed to the Café Neon. A housewife painting her fence later recalled his asking after her ailing parents. A young mother juggling her infant in the doorway remembered his pausing to pinch her son's cheek, commenting on the delicious smells wafting from her kitchen. Macris said something about hungry bears not being able to dance and continued on his way. As he turned the corner, the schoolmaster spotted two schoolboys crouching next to a German motorcycle. The vehicle had a sidebar and was routinely used by the Germans for the Petra-Molivos commute. As a rule, it was parked outside the Wehrmacht's well-guarded headquarters. But Dwinger and his adjutant had just learned that Lakis the Hunchback might be a resistance member and had gone in to investigate. Odd Lakis was no more than 50, but he was a sickly man who had been talked into helping the resistance, only to be denounced by an aggrieved neighbor. Dwinger and his adjutant could not have expected to stay very long, but it was long enough for the schoolboys to spot the parked motorcycle. They looked like children retrieving a ball or chasing a kitten, but something about them stopped the schoolmaster in his tracks. Yasa spedia! Macris lumbered down the alley, but the two boys took to their heels, accidentally dropping the knife they'd been using to slash the motorcycle's tires. One of the boys managed to escape, but his classmate, a local fisherman's son, tripped and went sprawling across the cobblestones. For a second or two, he lay in the alley, stunned, then scrambled to his feet, reaching for the abandoned penknife. At that precise moment, Dwinger and his adjutant emerged, dragging the chalk-faced hunchback between them. The boy was attempting to flee when the shot rang out. It reverberated beyond the alley, followed by a child's scream, then the schoolmaster's cry of protest. "Do not touch him!" Dwinger's voice answered. "Fass ich nicht an!" The command pinioned Macris in his mid-stride, his face wobbling like a drowning man's. The fisherman's son lay crumpled in the dirt, clutching his leg. Macris had fallen silent, but the fracas had drawn a knot of men out of the Café Neon, their fists hanging like dead birds at their sides. The schoolmaster was doing his best to control his body. Dwinger had let go of the hunchback and was shoving his pistol back into its holster, calmly, deliberately. He regarded Macris through half-closed eyes, his mouth lifting at one corner. Even without the sneering expression, Dwinger's was not an endearing face, his flinty eyes suggesting intimate knowledge of everybody's worst secrets. He knew Macris better than he did anyone else. The schoolmaster was the German's interpreter in Petra. "He's a child, just a child, for God's sake!" Macris's voice quavered, speaking the enemy's language. He made a frantic motion towards the bleeding boy. "He needs help! He needs medical attention!" The German regarded the gesticulating man for a moment, bared his teeth in something resembling a grin, then slid his whistle into his mouth and blew. Instead of reinforcements, a young man in a dark suit was shouldering his way through the crowd. "I'm the doctor," he kept repeating, "I'm the doctor." In fact, the closing of Greek universities had left Panos Gazetas short of obtaining a medical diploma, but the villagers had welcomed him with open arms when he arrived from the capital to be betrothed to the mayor's daughter. But Gazetas too was motioned away. There was a bleat of dismay from the crowd, promptly silenced by a threatening gesture from Dwinger. A gust of wind blew someone's hat off, but the hat went unclaimed, lying on the stones between the crowd and the whimpering child. The aspiring doctor took a decisive step forward. "Halt!" Dwinger spat out. "Halt!" When Gazetas ignored the order, the German pulled out his pistol. He smiled his fiendish smile, took a careful aim, then shot the writhing child into abrupt stillness. The onlookers lurched forth, then stopped with their mouths open like an impassioned chorus arrested in mid-song. The doctor's face had lost its color. Lakis the hunchback went abruptly limp. Dwinger whipped around to face the restive crowd. He shouted out a warning, then turned to help his adjutant haul the hunchback up to his feet. Macris, meanwhile, appeared to be drowning in a sea of loathing. His face working, he flung himself at Dwinger, lunging for his bullish neck. For a beat, the cluster of onlookers froze, their eyes bulging. Then they all spun and scattered like cats fleeing a bucket of water. There was no telling what the authorities might do if Dwinger lost so much as a single hair. The German escaped unscathed. The schoolmaster's attack had been foiled by the adjutant, who had let go of the hunchback, wrestling Macris into a headlock. At that moment, 3 soldiers came barreling down the alley. Dwinger was shaken, but less so than the fleeing villagers. If they had any doubts about what awaited Macris, it was only because of the schoolmaster's knowledge of German. His knowledge was not always adequate, but Macris was all the authorities had in Petra. And there were those who would later suggest that Dwinger had deliberately provoked Macris so as to get a better interpreter, maybe force the authorities to let him summon the Molivos schoolmistress. Petra's school was housed in an old Turkish mansion with a spacious yard graced by an acacia tree. A couple of farmers came by just as Macris was being roped to the ancient tree. The children had been ordered off the school grounds, but stood watching from behind the fence, along with the dazed farmers. It was this cluster of witnesses that later reported on the schoolmaster's melancholy end. The end would come with a single bullet to Macris' impetuous heart, but not immediately, not until Dwinger himself strode to the schoolhouse, black boot viciously kicking the entrance door. He stopped and peered into the dim interior. Glancing over his shoulder, he called to his adjutant, who strode away, returning with a jerry can full of fuel. Dwinger stepped aside, smiling a bit as the soldiers splashed the fuel across the threshold. Then Dwinger himself struck a match, as smugly theatrical as a stage magician. The children let out a strangled gasp. A rooster poised on the roof flapped away, cackling dementedly. Dwinger and the bound schoolmaster stood mutely beside each other, while the flames spread their arms, snapping up windows and doors, blackboards and desks and children's exercise books. It did not take long. Seeing the windows burst into flames, Macris exercised his only remaining power. He squeezed his eyes shut, grief blotching his cheeks as black jets of smoke strove towards the sky. There was no shutting out the hissing and spitting and crackling of the spreading flames, nor, for that matter, the sudden howl of a fisherman's wife who had just found her only son dead in a deserted alley. Achilles Macris died soon after. All luck is the hunchback was found in his jail cell, dead from a cardiac arrest. Franz Dwinger was the only man in Petra who had any reason to celebrate that Easter. But the failed attempt on his life would eventually bring about significant changes in both Petra and Molivos.
My goodness, I think we all had felt a lot of emotion with what you just read, and the change in the mood as, of course, the tragedy continues as you read the story. It was a very difficult time, a very tragic time, and even more so the fact that once Greece survived,
Once the Germans left,
the Second World War, shortly afterwards we have another tragic period, the Civil War, which is in the second part of your book. Again, a period that divided the population and created other sorts of tragedies when, family members were against each other and neighbors were against each other and betrayed each other, and I'll stop there, but it was a very, very difficult time, very tragic time indeed. You obviously haven't lived through these periods, and particularly the Civil War, which was in Greece. so is the German occupation, but I mean, that is something that other European countries have lived through in some way or another. But the Civil War was Greece, and as painful as it was, having read your book, I saw that you discovered elements of that history, which is very important and relevant to the story, but it's also very accurate. And I'm wondering, how did you do your research? How did you work? How did you find the sources? How did you do your research? I won't dwell longer.
Well, a lot of it, of course, came from books, and some of it came from interviews. But I found myself getting frustrated because people would not tell me as much as I wanted to know. They would say things like, well, there was fighting in the hills and people disagreed, but I wasn't getting the material I needed. And then I got lucky. And I'm going to tell you this only because it's the sort of thing that happens if you're very lucky when you're writing a book, and that convinces you that the powers that be want you to write this book. A friend's partner told me about a book that had been written in French but translated into English, and he said he'll answer all your questions about the Civil War. And so I went to Delibassis, which was then a very big bookstore, and I asked for the book, and they couldn't find it. And so I went to the next big store, whose name escapes me, but it was a very big one as well, and they couldn't find it. But a man standing nearby, who had also been looking for a book at the previous store, overheard me and said, "Oh, I know that book, but the title is different in English. And you got the author's name slightly misspelled." And so they couldn't find it in the computer. As soon as we had the right title and the right name, they found it. But the man, also looking for a book, was curious and asked me why I wanted this very big historical book. And so I told him that I was doing research for a book, and he said, "Come have an ouzo with me." There was an ouzery outside. And so I did, and it turned out to be a theater man from Icaria, originally from Icaria. Icaria was well known as a communist stronghold during the Civil War. And as we talked, he said that he had made a documentary about the Civil War in Icaria. And he said, "If you'd like, come home with me and I'll give it to you." And so he called his wife to reassure me there was a woman in the picture. And I went with him, and he gave me this cassette. And it's not a brilliant documentary, but it answered all my questions in a way that the book I'd been looking for did not. And I then knew what I had to do. So there's an element of luck in almost everything we do, and certainly in writing a book which requires information one doesn't have. Obviously, if you're writing a book about events that you yourself has experienced, your life is much easier. But almost everything in the book, all the historical events, I had not lived through. So I depended on information from books and people.
But that's a very interesting story and a very personal story. Is there any autobiographical element in your book? Any part?
Gustave Flaubert famously said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi." And so, of course, in that sense, I could say that there is some of me in Calliope. But I think it would be more accurate to say that Calliope Adam, c'est la femme que j'aimerais être. And that's to say that I would have liked to be like Calliope, even if there are some parts of her that I identify with. I would have liked to be as brave as she was, and I don't think I am. So I've sometimes created male characters that I wished I could have met in life. And in this case, I created a woman I wish I could have been.
Yes.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Of course, most of us have never been tested in the way that Calliope is, but I think that I would have been a coward.
Well, if you allow me, I will move a little bit from Arrested Song. I don't really want to, but I will, because there's something else that we'd like to discuss, and that's your new book. Tunes for Dancing Bears, which I understand it's finished, and I understand it will be released on May 1st of this year, very shortly. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your book? Maybe about the title?
The title, let me just get the exact title. The title comes from a quote by Flaubert, as it happens. And let me just find it. Language is like a cracked kettle on which we tap crude tunes for bears to dance to, while all the time longing to move the stars to pity. One more time. Language is like a cracked kettle on which we tap out crude tunes for bears to dance to, while all the time longing to move the stars to pity. The novel deals with the impact of a stillbirth on the marriage of Greek-Canadian couple. I'll digress a bit by telling you that after one reading, a Canadian woman came up to me and said, "You write so beautifully, Irena, but why can't you write about more cheerful subjects?" So I don't know, I don't remember what I answered, but I will now quote a French writer by the name of de Mandolin, who said that happiness writes white, it does not show up on paper. I'm interested in happiness like everyone else, but not particularly interested in writing about it. I am interested in situations. I'll stop for that. Wait. So I'm interested in situations where innocent people, are impacted by forces or events beyond their control. So in Arrested Song, we have Greeks who are impacted by the political events, the invasion, the Civil War, etc. And in the new novel, Tunes for Dancing Bears, we have a couple who expect to have a child after years actually of hoping for one, only to have the child be stillborn. So it's equally tragic, but of course in a very different way. The Arrested Song is a much bigger, more ambitious novel. This is a rather short novel that deals very closely with a marriage, and particularly the impact of the stillbirth on the relationship. Because the wife they're both Greek, but the husband comes from a prosperous, well-established family, whereas the wife is the daughter of recent immigrants. And her origins are in Mandolin. So I was once again able to have flashbacks to her childhood. So as I said, I like writing about the village, and do so whenever I can. Actually, my first published book was a collection of Greek village stories, and I haven't stopped.
No, a very strong connection to Greece indeed. You're an experienced writer. Do you have a writing routine, or what inspires you to write? Do you have an idea and start taking notes? Is it something that catches your thoughts and you start? How does it work?
You know, if writers waited for inspiration, Amazon would be out of business. Most of us, I think, have a routine, and I myself tend to write in the morning and edit in the evening. But Picasso said that people sometimes doubt that there is such a thing as inspiration. Picasso said there is inspiration, but it has to find you working. You can't just sit and wait for it to happen. Aspiring writers often think that they have to wait for that moment of it doesn't work like that. While you're writing, you will get ideas, but you can't wait for them to happen. Fiction writers are often asked where their ideas come from, and it's to fiction writer, ideas are as natural as breathing, and you get them unexpectedly from a scene you happen to witness, something you overhear on the metro, something you've read, something you yourself have experienced. It's unpredictable.
Yeah. But you studied creative writing. Do you think that creative writing workshops could be useful? I mean, I'm thinking of maybe new aspiring writers perhaps who are trying to find their way. What would you say?
Well, creative writing workshops are useful in that they provide a creative and structured environment and offer you feedback both from the instructor and your classmates. So they're very useful in that sense. I don't know. I had already begun to publish when I did my master's in creative writing, so I can't say that I learned all that much, but it was very useful to have that kind of environment. It also teaches you to accept criticism, and you have to learn to do that if you're going to continue writing.
Yes, indeed.
By the way, they often say that creative writing can't be taught, but it has to be learned, and that's how it is.
So experience comes in there as well, right? Your personal experiences as you write.
Well, and talent. Let's
And
not forget talent.
Talent is a given. I think it comes with any kind of creative work, be it painting or music. But even if you have that talent, I think not cultivating it, but putting it to use. I'm using simplistic terms, but putting it to use and being able to develop those words so that you can get what you feel and what you want to say out to the people who are there and who are looking forward to reading it or to listening to you. It's not always an easy process. Any tips for new writers?
Well, on my website, there's a section titled Tips for Aspiring Writers. So they're all there, but I will say one thing. Don't discuss whatever you're writing until you've written it. Don't post it on Facebook. And unless she has specific and useful credentials, don't show it to your grandmother. And if you must, remember that love is indeed blind.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think I want to sort of turn it to the audience. I'm sure you have questions to ask. Don't be shy. They're wonderful.
Thank you for a lovely session. I have a difficult question, I guess. Writing fiction must be different from writing poetry. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, it depends on the kind of poetry you're writing. For example, the poems I mentioned by Irving Layton, to me, is more a story than a novel, than a poem. It's not one. He's written some very, very fine poems. This is not, in my view, one of them, because it actually tells the story of Stella's life, which is very interesting. But it could be a story. There's no particular reason to write it as a poem. Just because the lines are chopped does not make it a poem. So I have ideas about poetry that are not necessarily shared by others. Many things that are written today, to me, are not poems. A poem moves in imagery, and imagery was what's important in a poem, and a lot of it is ineffable. You can't express it in a story, you can't express it in an essay, and it communicates in the way music does. You can understand it, you can feel it without necessarily being able to articulate it the way you do a short story or an essay. So that's the difference. But you know, I do have a very strict notion of what poetry should be, and it's not necessarily shared today by, you know, by a lot of people. So there's no particular reason to accept my view, but I've answered your question, I think.
There was another hand.
Thank you.
My friend Catherine.
Yes, my good friend. You write about pockets, small pockets on in the world, small pockets on islands, small villages. I'm just wondering, what's the Canadian reaction, the readership reaction to your work that's been set on Greek islands? And if it's been positive, why do you think it's, what draws them, the Canadian audience or the North
you know,
American
a lot of
audience?
people are interested in Greece, all over the world. I would say there is less interest in Canada than there is in the UK, for example, because fewer people, the distance is such that fewer Canadians are as familiar with Greece as the Brits are. I think only for that reason. And also, my book was published in the UK and in Australia, and there was considerable publicity in the UK, but not in Canada. So the publisher, unfortunately, had the rights of publishing, the distribution rights in North America, but didn't do anything about it. So very few people in Canada actually know about the book's existence, except through my own work on Facebook, etc. But you know, out of the 30-some million Canadians, I think very few have actually read the book or even heard about it.
What would cause people from abroad to be interested in a Greek village? What is it that draws them?
Why would they be interested in an African village or in any village? People who are interested in more than their limited Canadian reality are interested. But you know, in a way, what you say reflects the opinion of many publishers. When my agent sent it to some prominent American publishers originally, the response was Americans are not interested in Greek history, in modern Greek history and their politics. And probably many of them are not, but I think some are. Certainly when a book wins a prize or you know, there is publicity, there are enough people who are interested, but the average person probably is not. They said they're not interested. They might know something about the German occupation, but they're not interested in the Civil War, etc. But there is romance.
Conflict?
And
Conflict,
well, of
yes.
course, conflict. There's no romance, no novel without conflict.
Hi, I am Canadian, and I just happened to be here. I don't even know. I was just at the bookstore, and they gave me a ride here.
Oh, nice.
I've been in Greece for 4 days, and one of the questions that people ask me is like, "Why did you come to Greece?" And my answer is, I don't know. I felt it in my heart that I had to come here. And I'm writing an album right now and here for inspiration. I'll be here for 2 months. And I decided to come here by I don't know, like something pushed me to come here. And I wanted to know what brought you to Greece for the first time.
In the
like,
first place,
yes.
no better reason than yours. Certainly I wasn't interested in Greek history. I had a friend who had been here, and I just graduated from McGill, and I needed a holiday, and I hadn't had one for years and years. And so having heard what he had to say, I came. I didn't even know I didn't know anything about the place I was going to, but somebody he introduced me to had been going to Molivos every summer, so I figured it must be nice. And I was more interested in the beauty of the place than its history. So who knows what will happen to you.
Yes, exactly. Would you have ever would project that your life was going to be around this and like writing this book,
No.
and now years later
No,
to be where you are?
not. Absolutely not. Had a fortune teller told me that
Yeah.
this is
Someone else? But there's always a connection. Well, the two books at least, your new one and Arrested Song, there's obviously the connection to Greece. And I'm just wondering if that is a connection that stays with you even after your first visit that made you fall in love with Lesbos?
Well, I left out something that is actually quite
on.
important. I married a Greek.
Well, there you go. I'm crying, aren't I?
But many foreign women have married Greeks without becoming enslaved by Greek history. So, truth to tell, I fell in love with the village before I even set eyes on the man I would eventually marry. So I think the village has more to do with it, and I don't usually write autobiographically. So certainly a Rested Song includes everything I think I ever experienced or heard or saw or read. Everything went into it, but it's not an autobiographical novel.
It has a lot of elements, and I'm not asking sort of to dwell more on that, but I did find that it has a lot of elements, a lot of detail. You have the main characters, but there's so much detail that appears as, you know, the different as the story evolves, that it's like a tapestry, a complex tapestry of people and places, and then of course you have the main characters with their story, which is sort of, you know, I suppose the motifs or the colors that stand out. But it is like a tapestry.
Yes, it's often been said that.
Yeah, and I find that amazing.
Well, thank you.
We thank you. Two things. One thing, books are on sale.
No, sorry, you
what
forgot
did I do?
something.
What did I forget?
Would you be interested in hearing a short excerpt from my
I'm
new
so
novel?
Sorry. Yes, indeed. Indeed. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I warn you, it's not entertaining.
Well, Arrested Song wasn't
No,
entertaining.
this is even less entertaining.
But it was beautiful nonetheless.
Thank you, thank you.
That's okay. We can have a glass of wine afterwards.
Thank you. No, I have it. I just have to find it. So,
No, I mean for the tragedy.
yes, I see. So the chapters alternate between the wife's point of view, she has just experienced a stillbirth, and her husband's point of view. And I'm going to read the first very short chapter, which offers her experience, and then if you are still interested and still awake, I will read the husband's chapter, which is a little longer.
I just
Are we
want to make
running out
sure
of
that
time?
no, we're not going anywhere. But I just want to make sure that Lexicopoli is still around. So okay.
Still awake and
So
listening?
keep going.
The obstetrician seemed menacing. He looked like a shark, small eyes and stretched lips, and too many teeth when he opened his mouth to speak. He had given up trying to breathe life into her baby and was now leaning over her under the blinding lights. For a moment, nothing came out of his mouth but a puff of stale breath. And when at last he told her, muttering a word she did not understand, Lydia's own lips went stiff as if numbed by Novocaine. She became aware of silence, abrupt and furtive, and a sudden scuttling through the haze surrounding the birthing table. A young nurse stopped by and, her mouth twitching, asked whether she wished to hold her baby. Lydia was still grappling for coherence. Only a short while earlier, gazing at herself in the overhead mirror, she'd had the feeling of participating in some sort of theatrical production. Elaborate costumes and scenery, herself at center stage supine, obedient to the director, while a part of her struggled to wrest itself free of her possessive flesh. She had been good, had been wonderful. They had all said so, urging her to push, push, push. And she wanted to go on being good, dreaded being abandoned in this vast antiseptic chamber. At last she accepted the stillborn child and held him stiffly in her arms, looking into his face with dreamlike detachment. Mine? The room spun around. The child bore a remarkable resemblance to her husband. But where was her husband? Someone had tried to call him after she'd been admitted, but John, a surgeon at another hospital, was on call during that long holiday weekend and not immediately reachable. She had forgotten all about him until just this moment. Dr. Minar had left by then, closely followed by his assistants. Except for the young nurse, the room was empty, like a deserted theatre following a bomb threat. Had they forgotten her? Lydia felt paralyzed, overcome by a nightmarish terror of urgently needing to say something, but finding her tongue frozen, her eloquent Greek hands dead. Her fingertips on the child's head registered no sensation. "Your husband's on his way, Mrs. Gabriel," the nurse said, gently. Then something else, something about the baby. Anoxia. What? Lydia's heart was a wild bird trapped inside a chimney. She held the inert child for another moment, then thrust him back at the young nurse, who looked doomed, having failed to escape along with her colleagues. "Do something!" Lydia heard herself shout, her body shuddering as though subjected to electric shock. "Do something, please!" "You're still young, Mrs. Gabriel. She was 33, going on 34, but did not argue. All she said was, "No." The word reverberated in the empty room while her head rolled on the pillow. "No." Nothing else, just the one word uttered over and over like an amplifier of her shriveling heart. "No." A few minutes passed. Another nurse came in, checked her pulse, took her blood pressure, then, murmuring words of comfort, administered a sedative. All this took place in early September, that short, fickle period between seasons. By the time her husband arrived, Lydia Gabriel had been moved out of the birthing area and onto the bustling maternity ward, where she slept for several merciful hours. Every now and then, though, she muttered in her sleep, speaking in her mother tongue, "Panaia mu, Panaia voithis-emu." Thank you.
Thank you. You said there was another passage you wanted to read?
Would you like me to read a slightly longer husband's point of view? Yes.
For
I want
the
to hear you.
balance?
Yes.
For the balance,
Okay.
yes.
Do we have time?
Yes.
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 By mid-afternoon, John had been with his wife for 3 hours, going out now and then for a cup of coffee. He'd been out when Lydia had impulsively asked to see her son again. Though he was, of course, aware that modern hospitals encourage parents to spend time with a stillborn infant, he had always had doubts about this particular practice. So he stood there, arms hanging at his sides, and watched in grim silence while his wife communed with their lifeless child. She held him gingerly at first, then, glancing at the nurse, began to roll back the blanket, her lips quivering as a tiny white hand emerged from within the blue wool. Nauseated, he glanced toward the nurse, a large, brassy-haired Englishwoman called Mrs. Atkinson. He did not like her. She stood by the door discreetly, with a respectful, slightly obsequious air of an undertaker. He supposed she had been instructed to stay there, but held it against her all the same. He knew her type, conscientious, dull. Couldn't she leave them for a moment, go fill the jug with water, clear the untouched lunch tray? He looked at her coldly, relishing his aversion. And yet, only that morning, Mrs. Atkinson had seemed to him both thoughtful and efficient. He had been glad for Lydia, who, he knew from past experience, rather liked chatting nurses. Mrs. Atkinson spared herself no trouble, rubbing Lydia's legs. They had at one point begun to shake violently, murmuring in her ear. She had even noticed his hand, which he had injured in his rush to get to St. Margaret's, and offered to have it bandaged, while a young resident went about examining Lydia. Though John had declined, embarrassed, he had been grateful for the nurse's kindness. "I'll be back in a few minutes," she was saying now. "Buzz me if you need anything." She smiled shakily, then turned and bustled out, leaving them alone in the private hospital room with the dead child between them. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant or floor washing detergent. John felt a sudden urge to flee. He had expected his wife to shriek and howl the moment she saw the child. Instead, she seemed to go quietly insane, acting as if the baby was still alive. She had unwrapped the blanket and, perhaps surprised to find the child stark naked, gave the slightly raised window a vaguely anxious glance. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" she said in a small voice, as if speaking to herself. John both heard her and didn't. "If only I'd come in time," he said, raking his hand through his hair. "Of course, it's ridiculous. What could I have done? Still, I do feel I should have been there." He glanced again at the lifeless child. Lydia was stroking its abundant black hair. Like mine, he caught himself thinking. "It's not your fault," said Lydia in a toneless voice. "Stop blaming yourself." She had taken so long to answer, he forgot that he had spoken. "Emmanuel," she whispered, her hand caressing the baby's head, lingering on cheeks, white and still as wax, on tiny translucent earlobes. The child seemed to be sleeping. He looked to John far from beautiful. His ears were too large, his head like a melon squashed by a careless shopper. But all this was normal. He felt awed and oddly relieved. Lydia was fondling the hardening body, the tiny toes, the penis. John shifted his gaze towards the window. It was a grey afternoon with faint, intermittent sunshine. The need to flee made him want to throw up. The room seemed suddenly stuffy, faintly redolent of the cupboard lunch, meatloaf and overcooked broccoli. He had not eaten all day and was not tempted to now, hating hospital food even at the best of times. Still, the nausea might be partly due to hunger. He closed his eyes and drew in a steady breath. The moment passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. As they say in Greece, kalotaxi, though, the new book.
Thank
We
you.
hope that it travels far and wide.
Now, for those of you, I just want to say, for
No,
those of you who are
please
dying to ask a question and don't dare, this is not autobiographical.
No.
I had a child and she's here with me dealing with all my technical problems.
Thank you very much, Irena,
Thank
for
you.
today.
And thank you for coming.
And thank you for sharing with us. The evening isn't over. As I said before, there are books out there in the foyer, and please go by and this isn't advertising. I read the book and I'm talking about Arrested Song now, and of course as soon as I can get my hands on the new one I will. I was just totally taken in. It's very beautifully written. Tragedy, difficult times, yes, but nonetheless very beautifully written, so congratulations. In terms of the new book, it's not available in bookstores yet. I understand that it's possible to pre-order, but I'm not sure where. Diamandis tells me that he's not certain about Lexicopolio yet.
We will know, I think, within the month.
Stay tuned.
But it is definitely available for pre-ordering,
Yeah.
and in fact, pre-orders are welcome because they help build momentum for the book.
Absolutely, so we can search. Okay, thank you. Glass of wine, I think we would all like a glass of wine at this point. It's an opportunity for those of you who will purchase books, please come by. I know Irena would be happy to sign your books, the books. And then we can have a more private chat as well. Okay? Thank you everyone for being here. It was cold out there, and I think there was some sort of a demonstration at some point, so thank you for making it out here.
Thank you.